Zelensky said in that meeting, his message to Trump was basically, don't trust Putin. He's bluffing, was the language he used.
Welcome back. It's time for the Trump Dump, where we take a look at the biggest news stories stateside. This evening, we have got the US Vice President wading into our human rights, the White House renovations that the president is planning, but of course, before all of that, the preparations underway for that very significant summit with the US president in audience with the Russian president. Right now, George Grylls, the Washington correspondent for The Times, joins us. George, hello.
Good evening.
Shall we start with Donald Trump threatening very severe consequences, he said, if Vladimir Putin doesn't agree to end the war after Friday's summit in Alaska? They had those virtual talks today between the US president and European leaders. The UK Prime Minister was part of that. Also was, crucially, Volodymyr Zelensky. And Donald Trump said after that meeting he was hopeful that Friday's summit would then lead to a meeting with Putin and Zelensky.
There's a very good chance that we're going to have a second meeting, which will be more productive than the first, because the first is I'm going to find out where we are and what we're doing. We're going to meet with, I would say, the second meeting. If the first one goes okay, we'll have a quick second one. I would like to do it almost immediately, and we'll have a quick second meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky and myself, if they'd like to have me there for the second meeting. I think the second meeting, if the second meeting takes place, now there may be no second meeting, because if I feel that it's not appropriate to have it because I didn't get the answers that we have to have, then we're not going to have a second meeting.
George, we're learning a little bit more, aren't we, every day about the president's plan for how he wants that meeting to go on Friday. The first thing is, how much do you think his mind or his resolve was shaped by the meeting he had with European leaders and, crucially, the Ukrainian president earlier this afternoon?
Well, they tried to assemble as many leaders as possible. So you had Merz from Germany, Macron from France, Starmer, all alongside Zelensky, basically trying to kind of big him up and say, look, we're all united together. And when you're going to have your talks with Putin on Friday in Alaska, you're kind of representing us as well. And Zelensky said in that meeting, his message to Trump was, basically, don't trust Putin. He's bluffing, was the language he used, because he said, look at what's happening on the ground in Ukraine and the fact that Russian troops are advancing as we speak. They've made quite a kind of prominent offensive in Donetsk, which is one of the kind of provinces that are basically under discussion at the moment. And he said, if you just look at all the evidence, there's no sign that he's willing to sign up for a ceasefire at the moment. So bear that in mind.
Yeah, what he has said, though, is there will be severe consequences for President Putin if that meeting doesn't go to plan. I mean, what are people imagining those might be?
Well, the threat that has been dangled over the Russians for some time is these secondary sanctions. So rather than pursue the Russian economy itself, you pursue the economies of countries that continue to do trade with Russia, because effectively Russia has kind of, managed to weather the storm of sanctions and kind of found, if it wasn't able to sell oil and natural gas as much to Europe in the quantities that it used to do, it was able to find new markets in India and China. So that the threat that Trump has suggested to kind of get Putin to the table is that the US will put tariffs on those countries that continue to buy Russian oil. And in fact, they already have done so in the case of India. So there's 50% tariffs on India. They haven't made any move against China. And in fact, Trump himself had previously kind of talked of this figure of 100% tariffs. So that would appear to be the threat. But at the same time, you have to say that last Friday was a deadline, one of several deadlines that Trump has set Putin. And he said, you've got to agree to a ceasefire. You've got to stop the fighting in Ukraine. Otherwise, we're going to follow through with these sanctions. And yet it didn't happen. Putin will be pretty chuffed that he managed to avoid that last week. And given the precedent of however many deadlines that he's managed to kind of watch come and go, he'll probably feel pretty confident that that these threats are hollow.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, did those threats have anything to do with why they then are now having a meeting now? It's so difficult to tell sort of exactly what leads to what. The Times is reporting, George, I'm sure you've seen, this is David Charter's piece here, that Russia and the USA have discussed a model for ending the war that would be similar to Israel's occupation of the West Bank. How would that work?
Well, this is trying to kind of surmount the hurdle, which is how do you recognize the fact that Russia has effectively captured a large portion of Ukraine without officially recognizing that Russia has captured a large amount of Ukraine? Because if you set the precedent that countries can reshape borders by force, that they can invade another country and conquer territory and basically expand their own country as Russia appears to have done, and that's kind of codified into law and everyone respects that, then there's no hope, and the whole international system breaks down and it encourages countries to wage wars against one another. At the same time, to get some sort of ceasefire, there's going to have to be some acknowledgement that the Ukrainians aren't going to regain this territory, this land. So the kind of the parallel of the West Bank is basically a way of kind of saying, well, look, Israel has occupied this region since 1967, and although no one recognizes Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank and probably never will, that's kind of analogous to the situation in Ukraine. Obviously, critics very quickly will point out that the West Bank is hardly the most peaceful or settled region in the world. Arguably, it continues to be one of the most disputed and violent parts of the world.
Is it that, George, that sort of the US negotiators are coming from a position to say that the reality of war is that Russia has taken some of this land and it's going to be extremely difficult? I mean, Donald Trump's talked about sort of land swaps, but we were hearing earlier from someone involved in Ukraine's defense ministry. I mean, there's sort of just a refusal to concede any territory. But how do you persuade the Russian president to give back land that they have occupied for 3 years?
Well, he's terming it swaps. I think that's probably a euphemism for conceding land. I think it's going to be very hard to convince the Russians to give up what they've occupied. Bear in mind, one of their original war aims was to secure a land bridge to Crimea, which is the peninsula that they annexed originally in 2014. And Trump earlier this week, I mean, he made the extraordinary description of that part of Ukraine that kind of borders the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea as oceanfront property. He said, I speak the words of a real estate tycoon, and that's how we refer to it. The problem is that same territory that he referred to as oceanfront property is exactly what Putin wants as well, to establish his land bridge to Crimea. So I think it's pretty far-fetched to think the Russians will be giving that up.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We're sort of each day finding out a tiny bit more information about how that meeting might play out on Friday. Let's move on to some other Trump-related stories that have broken in the last 24 hours. The administration's accused the British government of repeatedly imposing serious restrictions on free speech. Now, this isn't new. We've heard sort of echoes of this in the last few months or so. A report by the US State Department accused Britain and other American allies of weakening its position on human rights in the past year. They were talking about anti-Semitism, bans on silent prayer, protests outside abortion clinics, also criticising the Online Safety Act. This is something that the Vice President has made clear he's unhappy about.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, he came to Munich Security Conference earlier this year, famously, and kind of tied what he saw as kind of backsliding on freedom of speech issues to American support for Europe. And, of course, he's in holiday in the Cotswolds at the moment, although it doesn't appear to be much of a holiday, given how many meetings he's had with various people. It's not my idea of a holiday. But, yeah, I mean, this is a common theme on the right of American politics at the moment, that, Britain is lost, that it's embraced multiculturalism and that has failed. And, you hear these arguments played out over and over again. So this plays into that narrative. At the same time, if you look at Trump's obvious warmth with which he kind of talks about the UK, just had his holiday in Scotland, opening up his new golf course, there's a kind of disconnect between how they kind of there's a bit of criticism and over free speech stuff, but at the same time, there's no doubt that the relationship between the UK and the US is pretty strong, and arguably this administration thinks more fondly about Britain than the Biden administration, for example.
Yeah. Final thing we should move on to. So the president's been speaking this afternoon at the Kennedy Center in Washington. He's announced he's hosting the famous honor ceremony. Here he was talking about it earlier.
So I have agreed to host. Do you believe what I have to do? And I didn't want to do it, okay? They're going to say he insisted. I did not insist. But I think it will be quite successful, actually. It's been a long time. I used to host the Apprentice finales, and we did rather well with that. So I think we're going to do very well because we have some great honorees, some really great ones. Since 1978, the Kennedy Center honors have been among the most prestigious awards in the performing arts. I wanted one. I was never able to get one. This year, it's true, actually. I would have taken it if they would have called me. I waited and waited and waited, and I said, the hell with it. I'll become chairman. And I'll give myself an honor. Maybe I'm going to honor, next year we'll honor Trump.
Right, so where he hosts The Apprentice, but also he said, George, he's got plans to renovate the centre, but also, and tell us what the Kennedy Centre is and what it represents, but also he wants to renovate the White House too. What might be behind his design aesthetic, maybe? Lots of glitzy gold?
Yeah, so the Kennedy Center is the kind of big performing arts venue in Washington, D.C., and not content with just overseeing this big makeover of the White House, where he's installed this patio. He's put in place these parasols on the patio that used to be the kind of the Rose Garden lawn. The parasols are the same one from Mar-a-Lago. He appears to kind of be replicating the aesthetic of Mar-a-Lago at the White House. He's also got plans for this massive ballroom that he's adding, $200 million ballroom that's being added to the White House. With that kind of typical Trump style. It's got coffered ceilings and big golden chandeliers and all the rest of it. In fact, he was actually seen the other day walking on the top of the White House, kind of overseeing the renovations and pointing to this and that to make sure it was all just right. Anyway, he's not content with that. His attention is now turned also to the Kennedy Center. So he's overseeing a big renovation there as well. So, yeah, he's keeping busy. I mean, it's just another day in Trump land where, you're watching a press conference where he's talking about doing a deal with Putin in Alaska over Ukraine, and then suddenly he's kind of awarding KISS, the rock band, a kind of a Kennedy Center award, and talking about his plans to kind of do it up. It's just another day.
Yeah, and keeping you busy. George, thank you very much. George Grylls, the Washington correspondent for The Times.